All right, I'm going to call this meeting of the Plan Commission to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Ackerson?
Here.
Mr. Fell?
Here.
Mr. Fitch?
Here.
Mr. Hopkins?
Here.
Mr. Otto? Mr. Storr?
Here.
Mr. Trail? And Mr. Turner?
We do have a quorum. Are there any changes to the agenda? We have minutes from, believe it or not, September 8th, 2016, regular meeting of the Plan Commission. Do we have any motions regarding the minutes? Mr. Trail.
I'm not sure that the folks about me really relate like the crankiness. Hey. Other than that, I think they're accurate.
Is that a motion? Anybody? Somebody. Mr. Feld moves to approve the minutes. Can I get a second? Mr. Turner seconds the motion. Any changes? All those in favor by voice vote of approving these minutes, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The minutes are approved. We have any communications? No continued public hearings, no old business. Therefore, we have a new public hearing. I'll open Plan Case 2272 CP16, an application by the Urbana Zoning Administrator to adopt the 2016 Urbana Bicycle Master Plan as an amendment to the 2005 Urbana Comprehensive Plan. Mr. Garcia, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good evening. So I'm excited to say that we are back tonight with the Bicycle Master Plan. And this is a request by the Zoning Administrator that the Plan Commission and the City Council adopt the 2016 Urbana Bicycle Master Plan as an amendment to the 2005 Comprehensive Plan. Just for a little bit of background, this 2016 plan would replace the 2008 Bicycle Master Plan, which has been part of our comprehensive plan since April of 2008. This new Bicycle Master Plan was prepared by the Champaign County Regional Planning Commission over the course of 2 years, and it was guided by a steering committee which included members from various agencies, including the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission, the Park District, School District, MTD, and others. The RPC held 4 public workshops throughout Urbana, plus 1 community-wide workshop at the Urbana Middle School to give the public opportunity to contribute to the plan. As you will perhaps recall, the RPC brought the draft plan to a joint meeting of the Plan Commission, BPAC, Traffic Commission, and Sustainability Advisory Commission last December. And then after that, in January and February, the plan was discussed at BPAC, at Traffic Commission, and then in February it was discussed at the Plan Commission. And at the end of the Plan Commission meeting, there was a motion to for staff to make some changes that were suggested, to go back, make some changes to the plan and the executive summary prior to the Plan Commission making a recommendation to the City Council. So since that February meeting, the RPC and the city staff have gone back and revised the plan to address the comments that we had received. We have since reconvened the steering committee in October. We brought this to BPAC last month on the 15th, and it was discussed there. And at the end of the BPAC meeting, they unanimously voted to recommend that the Plan Commission forward the plan to the City Council with a recommendation to approve with a couple of changes that they suggested. The revisions that we made since February are attached to your memo, along with a brief summary of those changes. I'll go through those briefly in a couple of minutes but I wanted to finish going through the content of the memo. So since we're asking that since this will become part of the comprehensive plan, we do want to ensure that the bicycle master plan aligns with the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan, which it does. Among the goals it aligns with are to ensure that land use patterns conserve energy, to promote access to employment opportunities for all Urbana residents, to provide safe, efficient, and cost-effective movement of people and goods through and around the city, to optimize operating conditions of the existing transportation system, to improve access to transportation modes for Urbana residents, to create a multimodal transportation system, to avoid development patterns that can potentially create an overdependency on the automobile, and finally to ensure adequate transportation facilities for new growth. The Bicycle Master Plan is composed of, it begins with an executive summary, which, as you can imagine, just summarizes the elements of the plan. It also sort of lays out a vision for the plan and for the future of bicycling in Urbana. And then there are chapters. I'll just briefly go through the chapters here. There's an introduction, and then Chapter 2 looks at the history and trends of bicycling in the U.S. and in Urbana in particular. Then there's a literature review and review of peer cities and model cities. Chapter 4 gives guidelines on bicycle facilities or bicycle infrastructure. Chapter 5 discusses those facility types. Chapter 6 is an inventory of the existing conditions of bicycle infrastructure in the city. Chapter 7 discusses the public input and the information that was gathered from the public on bike routes, issues related to bicycling, and then recommendations. Chapter 8 is an analysis of opportunities and constraints for bicycling and for expanding the bicycling network in Urbana. And then Chapter 9 is really, I'd say, where the action pieces begin, and Chapter 9 is the goals and objectives. And so the structure of Chapter 9, it's separated into 6 themes, and each theme has associated goals, objectives, performance measures, strategies, and then responsible parties for actually achieving each of the objectives. And then in addition, and this was added since the last time, or since February, there are 2 visionary concepts that were added to this section. And those really, as the name suggests, they provide a vision for the future of Urbana as a safe and increasingly bicycle-friendly community. As I'm sure you're all aware, Urbana is currently a gold-level bicycle-friendly community as designated by the League of American Bicyclists. And the first visionary concept is not to, rest on the laurels of that designation and really shoot for platinum designation or perhaps even diamond, which is the highest level of bicycle-friendly community. And then the second vision is to pursue Vision Zero, policies and strategies, and the goal there is to achieve 0 transportation-related deaths in Urbana. Vision Zero is actually a recent council goal, is to pursue Vision Zero. So this brings the plan into alignment with that. And the core idea behind Vision Zero is that transportation deaths are preventable and therefore unacceptable. Or, to put it really simply, it's just that no one should die trying to get somewhere. So we added that to Chapter 9. The themes briefly are safety, connectivity, convenience, education, equity, and then finally implementation. On to Chapter 10, that is an analysis of the bicycle level of service in Urbana, and that's a standard for essentially quantifying the bike friendliness of a roadway and the bike network. Chapter 11 really is, I'd say, a lot of the meat of the plan is recommendations for bike infrastructure, and those are separated into short, medium, and long-term projects. And then finally, Chapter 12 is implementation, so it's how to make it happen. And that rounds out the plan. So before I conclude my report and talk about the options here, I wanted to just briefly run through the revisions that we have outlined in Exhibit A of the memo. I'm not going to go through them all point by point, since you all have seen them and have been able to look through them, but I think I'd just like to highlight some of the pieces. So for the executive summary, we had it in draft form back in February, but we really revised it to, I think, be more visionary, more action-oriented in the language, and just more clear in general. In Chapter 1, we made, the only real edits we made there were to the to Table 1, and we added more relevant council and mayor goals and objectives to that table. Chapter 4, we just made some minor text edits. Chapter 5, we made some text edits and then also some technical clarifications for bike lanes and paths. And then in Chapter 9, we reordered the goals. We wanted to, or we also described the goals, I think, in more clearer and consistent terms. We changed all the dates from, for example, 2015 to 2016, as a matter of course, and then made some suggested edits to some of the goals and objectives. In Chapter 10, we just gave a more clear description of bicycle level of service, and then we also added a paragraph discussing an alternative measure called level of traffic stress, which could potentially be used in the future in lieu of or in addition to bicycle level of service, and that's just a measure that may potentially be more useful to analyze and describe the bike network. So on the whole, we didn't go through and really change the bones of the plan. I think we just made some specific edits that were suggested to us, but I mean, the content was there. I think we added more visionary language. We added more direct and more action-oriented language. But I mean, on the whole, I think the plan is pretty consistent with what you had seen in February as well. So that concludes my report, but I wanted to run through the options that you have in this case. And so for the first option, and I'm going to read this verbatim because we have a slight change in the recommended language to this, and I'll point out where that is. But the first option is to forward this case to the City Council with a recommendation to approve the adoption of the 2016 Urbana Bicycle Master Plan. And here's where we add something. To supersede the 2008 Bicycle Master Plan as an amendment to the 2005 Urbana Comprehensive Plan. Option B would be to do the same, but making specific suggested changes. And then option C would be to forward this with a recommendation to deny the plan, the adoption of the plan. Staff recommends approval. We have BPAC unanimously recommended approval, and we also we brought this through the steering committee, and they approved the changes. So we would recommend approval, and I will take any questions you have We also have Craig Schonkweiler here. If you have really technical questions, he can answer those, I'm sure.
All right, thank you, Mr. Garcia. Any questions for Mr. Garcia? Mr. Trail?
Quick one, you keep saying "we." Does that mean you were a member, or this is Urbana's staff, or?
So when I say we made edits, mostly staff, and then running it by the steering committee and BPAC. So it's a joint effort. I think. Yeah.
Mr. Hopkins?
I'm not sure this is really a question or discussion. We're adopting this as an element of the comprehensive plan amendment. Subtly wording, you don't need to worry about it. Which suggests that how it fits into the comprehensive plan matters. And it, as in its own role, is focused on bicycles. As an example of something I think we have to at least think about, from reading some of the background stuff, the most likely future contentions around the implementation of this plan are likely to be loss of on-street parking and reduction in vehicle lanes. And if that's the case, and if the plan is to be useful, it seems to me that I ought to be able to find in the plan, such as in the map of proposed bike paths, bikeways, bike lanes, where there either would necessarily be or might be reductions in on-street parking or vehicle lanes. And I confess I did not go through the thing with a fine-tooth comb, but I could not figure out how to do that. And so I'm wondering if I missed something. And if not, I think it's something that we ought to have in the combination of our, in other words, to a certain extent, what I'm saying is this may not belong in the bicycle element, but as the bicycle element becomes introduced into the comprehensive plan, I think it belongs somewhere, and I couldn't find it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's. Oh.
Good evening, Craig Schunkweiler, Assistant City Engineer. I believe it's in the appendix when they talk about each independent bicycle way. There, it is noted in the appendix where there would be on-street parking removal. I agree with you. I think now that you brought that up, I don't, it could be added somewhere more so in the body.
Or just
or-
more findable.
Right, more findable. Because, but I will tell you, just from recalling, I don't think we have much left to remove. We really went through quite a bit of our battles to remove already. We have some on Green Street with the MCOR project. That's probably the next one that's going to come up between Lincoln and Race. I don't recall too many other locations, but I think that's a good point.
And I'm not, at this point anyway, raising a concern about the actual substance. I'm raising the concern that the information was inaccessible, and I think it's important information. If part of what you're saying is there's very little of it, I think it suggests from the bicycle plan point of view, it would be even more valuable to actually highlight that fact.
Right, right. And you're right, in the past, that's probably been the single most contentious item. But I think your point is well taken, and I think that's something that should be included.
And tell me again where it was?
I believe it's in the appendix, one of the appendix there where, and I'm going by memory here, but I believe that there's an appendix where each separate street is listed, and then it might be in the, where the level of service is.
Okay,
We can,
yeah,
but I think what we could do is pull that out and maybe note that somewhere more so in a relevant or upfront manner.
my suggestion would be to annotate the map so that it can be directed from the map.
Sure.
Because anybody who's actually going to raise that question is going to do it by looking at the map.
Right,
Probably by looking at the map and seeing that there's something imposed on their street
right,
and wondering whether it removes parking,
right.
and therefore wanting to know.
Yeah, I would call it an oversight at this point. I don't think it
That's
wasn't
fine.
intentional
Just
to,
Suggestion.
from the consultant to do that, but I think that's a good point, yeah.
Anything further, Mr. Hopkins?
Not at the moment.
Not at the
no.
moment. Further questions? Oh,
Well,
Mr. Garcia, did you have?
I just wanted to point out that on page, let's see, in Exhibit E, the joint meeting minutes on page 4, the second full paragraph down, looks like this was discussed. It's the paragraph that starts with Gabe Lewis. It says he stated that there were not as many areas where on-street parking would need to be removed as were recommended in the previous plan. He said that Green Street between Busey Avenue and Ray Street was the only major street where the removal of on-street parking was scheduled.
Yeah, actually, but major streets are not the problem, because everybody knows about that.
Yeah.
It's residential streets where the problem is. And in any case, again, that simply points out that it was discussed. All I'm
Right,
suggesting is
right.
there ought to be a way from the map to figure out whether, and I would include vehicle lanes, not just parking, because those are the questions people are going to ask, and
Right.
the purpose of the plan is to answer those questions ahead of time, as far as I'm concerned.
Further questions for staff? Mr. Turner?
I was just, you may have to just remind me of this. Is there a plan for when the plan will be updated again that's addressed in the plan? If that makes sense. Since it was 8 years ago, is there kind of a timetable or a time frame to,
I believe there's a section in there where the recommendation is every 5 years.
okay.
And believe it or not, this has been a multi-year effort.
Yeah.
Which it kind of turned into an 8-year
Yeah.
type timeline.
Sure.
Our goal is every 5.
Okay.
But I think we envision the next one not to be so much of a complete rewrite as this one was. Hopefully it's more, there was a yeoman's effort put into this. And then hopefully the next one's more taking us to platinum or
Right.
a diamond, solidifying that, but not completely rewriting it, because we did put a lot of funding into this.
Sure. Thank you.
Further questions? I guess you're excused. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, now we'll enter the public hearing phase. Let me remind the audience of the rules for public hearing in the Plan Commission. Staff has presented their case. Now, if there's anyone who wishes to speak in behalf of the comprehensive plan in favor of, you will be heard. Opponents can then come forward and be heard. Others may be heard on the question. Excuse me. And then the petitioner may be rebut. Opponents may rebut, and petitioner, or in this case, the city's the petitioner. So, but anybody who wants to say something at the end, just a second, sir. I'll call you up, and then we'll go into deliberation and discuss and/or entertain motions. So, would anybody like to address the commission in favor of the plan? Sure. If you could just state your name for the record.
David Monk, 115 North Market, Champaign.
Thank you.
Most of these plans are excellent for the urban sites, but they don't do a lot for the long-run bicycling. In this case, you have Danville and Decatur, and we would like to see the connection there. There are people here who do use long trails. The East Central Illinois has almost none, except for the Kickapoo Trail, which is going in. And I think it will change things. The Katy Trail in Missouri has found it so popular, 200 miles between St. Louis and Kansas City. They're expanding it. Their income from it, the income from the changes of museums, bicycle shops, restaurants, all along the way, has been very profitable. Tourism is in there. People enjoy this. 35,000 miles of this networking of railbed saves railroads for the future that they could never buy back at a reasonable price. So it might be that some of these beds will be here for 200 years. It's just that the federal government was very afraid that they were losing too many railroads. So we have one here that perhaps, if you are looking at it, could connect Bloomington to Indianapolis if it were returned to rail, or to go to Danville for something that might be industrial. I think I would like for cities to think outside their jurisdiction. This is regional planning beyond the regional planning for Champaign County. How do you get to Springfield? How do you get to Chicago? What are our bicycle ways in the future? We have a site between Rantoul and Paxton, which is an old Route 45, which is a concrete road, which could be a bicycle way. You could work your way all the way to Kankakee. But I don't see that in this sort of plan, and it's not just the Urbana plan, it is other cities too. It's a concentration on the bikeway, and it's very good. It deals with all the rules and regulations that make it possible to bike around town. But there's another dimension to this, and I think it backs up onto what happens in the cities. If you have good long-range trails, then the city is augmented. Like if you have to go through from Walmart through in front of the hospitals and across Lincoln Avenue to get to Champaign, how do you do it? If you do it for the long-range people, you're also doing it for the local people. There is finance here. 80% of the trail to Danville, 25 miles, is Federal Rail Banking Act. 10% is state, 10% is local. There's a fear that this is taking tax money out of my pocket because it's a $12 billion budget. And that's awesome to some people, but if you put it over 200 years and X number of people who are using it, it's an infrastructure. You have to do it now because the opportunity is there. But it needs an imagination to look at those things, to look 5 miles outside these trails to one side and the other to see what are the resources. Where is the Lincoln Trail, for instance? Where are the other resources that people could go to? I think if you're building roads, if you're building expressways, if you're building airways, there is a basic cost and it's expensive. So I don't think $12 million is too expensive in that case. But I would like to see in this sort of plan some relationship to the communities around you. And I thank you very much for...
Not really a question, it's more an observation. I've found that the many places I've lived over the years, the fastest way to start getting serious funding for rail to recreational trail is to get a credible proposal on the table to take that rail right of way and put passenger rail on it. That seems to bring the federal money out for bike paths in no time at all.
Nope. quite sure what you were asking there.
I'm just, what I've seen over, a number of, in DC and Seattle and a number of places, quick way, one of the fastest ways to get sudden funding to appear for recreational rail to trail conversions is if there starts to be movement toward using that rail right of way for passenger rail. That seems to bring lots of money out to suddenly do rail to trail conversions.
Yes, some of it depends on activists that are wanting to do it. The rail trail movement has been wonderful, and it's supported by both parties, so that's helpful, and they can put money and pressure behind some of this sort of thing, and they do go to places like Pittsburgh, and they go around it. So you have trails that go around, but they're supported by people in rail to trails who come into a conference at Pittsburgh and ride between Washington and Pittsburgh. And then go through Charleston and places like this. And, it's happening. The railroads are basically concerning themselves with main lines. They want dual lines so that they can pass passenger trains with very expensive freight trains. And they want speed and technology and heavyweight vehicles. So the networks that we have, fortunately for bicycleways, are likely to stay around for quite some time. We're just losing one between Paris and Danville, Paris and Decatur. The Department of Natural Resources picked it up. They only picked up 30 miles of 56 miles. It goes between Oakland and Hinesboro, Arcola, Lovington, and it stops at Lovington, but it could have continued to Heavey City and on to Decatur. We're losing it because it was so slow in getting into action that 11 sites had been sold to farmers. So it was not contiguous. And the Department of Natural Resources was looking for a trail, not so much people like myself are interested in the right of way, so we're looking for the prairie, which is down to about 0.01% of what was, if you're looking for a real prairie. So buying railroad beds is a way of preserving. So Department of Natural Resources is concerned about that, but they're also concerned about the contiguity. Unfortunately, some of us were well before there was a Rail Banking Act. So we didn't get that opportunity to get the rail banking money that comes to the Kickapoo Trail. We have another 33 miles that goes from Cisco to Monticello, Railroad Museum in the middle, and then on to Clinton. And 5 miles of this bed joins Clinton Power Plant Lake and Weldon Springs State Park. And that's in jeopardy again because we were before the Rail Banking Act. We did the same thing. We have clauses for railroad contiguity if it has to come back. And that's not appreciated by trail people often, but it's a sort of thing I think we should be thinking broadly about what's around us.
Great, I appreciate that, Mr. Funk. Is that good for you, Mr. Trail? All right, thank you very much, sir. Any other in favor of the plan wish to address the Plan Commission? If you could state your name for the record, please.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Hoyle, and I'm the interim chair of the Urbana Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. And I wanted to come tonight and encourage you to adopt the plan. I also was on the steering committee, and we have spent many, many, many hours working on the plan. I think it's a good plan. It'll help us move forward. And I also, as a profession, am a transportation planner and do almost primarily active transportation planning. So I'm working on plans in places like Iowa City and Columbia, Missouri, and I bicycle in those communities. And while we may lack the trails, which I am very much in favor of our developing, we have a really good system in our city that we need to finish building out, which those communities generally lack the on-street connections. They have great trails, but they don't have the network that we do and that we have planned for our community. And this plan will help us move forward in achieving our goals and become more bicycle friendly. So, we do have the distinction of being the first gold bicycle friendly community in the city. And there are things I would have liked to have had even more aggressive ideas in the plan. There's so much happening with infrastructure development for bicycling right now. I would really like for us to take a look at some of the new designs, but you can't delay a plan with the idea in mind that you're going to keep updating it with the latest infrastructure designs, because it's a very rapidly changing field in this country. So we've got a great plan. We'd like to get started implementing it, and in 5 years then we can go back and add in those things that have now received approval from the federal government as standard infrastructure into our network here. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have if you have any of me. Mm-hmm.
for driver's education and in the schools. That didn't really see too much to help kind of older and drivers that are beyond that learn more of the bicycle courtesy and rules and so forth. Wondered if committee has given that any thought, or if that's
We did, in fact, I think the strength of our education program is what helped catapult us to gold, because we have, by American standards, a very rigorous education program in the community. And this last year, we used part of a Safe Routes to School grant that I administered through the Transit District in our CU Safe Routes to School project. We used that to bring in a seminar to certify more league cycling instructors through the American Institute, the League of American Bicyclists, I'm sorry. And so we now have 9 certified instructors, including Kevin, yes. We provided scholarships for people with that funding. And so now we have more certified instructors. So we're trying to expand the educational offerings. It's frankly a struggle, because most of the time people have been volunteering their time, and you can only ask people to volunteer so much. So I've been focusing more on trying to have instructors receive some compensation for that, maybe not a lot, but a little, although some of us do it as part of a job, like Kevin, Lily at the Sustainable Transportation Coordinator for campus also does that. And this year we're going to be offering a class through the Urbana Park District in April. And that is targeting adult cyclists, and so that will be on a Tuesday and a Thursday and then a Saturday. I would like to see regular offerings of those classes through the Park District so that people know that it's predictable, that it will be there, and they can go and take a bike class in the spring and the summer, and that it'll be there again next year if they can't do it this year. So I'd like for us to have a sustainable program. We also, this last summer, worked with the Park District, and we'll do it again this year, and Charlie Smythe was very involved in that, doing the children's summer camp, doing a bicycle education component with them. I've been doing them at the after-school program at the middle school. That's a pretty challenging group to work with right after school. And another thing that I'm really focused on trying to see have happen in the community is an Earn a Bike program for kids in particular, where they go and work on a bike, and after so many hours, they then can finish the bike and it can be theirs, and they have learned how to maintain it. But we need a staff person to help run that in some capacity. So I'm hoping this next week, and I'm in Chicago for work, that I can talk to some of the people who operate programs up there through some of the nonprofits. So there's a lot of activity going on in education. I don't think it's as visible to the public at large because the amount of education isn't enormous due to the lack of resources to fund doing more of it. I personally think it should be in all of our schools. If you learn how to play basketball and football and soccer and baseball, I think you should learn how to ride a bike. You're more likely to ride a bike over the course of a lifetime than you are to play football. So this is something I think that we as Americans ought to be thinking about and shifting our focus on to help people learn those skills that will help them live long, healthy lives. And I think bicycling is one of those things.
I interpreted Mr. Store's question to be about educating drivers of cars and trucks,
That's correct.
rather than drivers of bicycles.
Well, we
And-
work on that as we can with public campaigns, but that takes even more money to run the campaigns for that. There are questions in our driver's test now, but I think it's one question, and most people miss it. I will tell you there is an online quiz, and in Urbana, on campus and in Champaign, we do have the ticket diversion program. So it applies to bicyclists at this point, but if there were interest and people willing to work on it, I suppose there would be an opportunity for drivers to take the quiz as a deferment for some sort of violations. But we had to pass a city ordinance for that ticket so that it wasn't part of the state vehicular code to get that program in place. And so, things are not always as simple to implement as we'd like. You're correct. I think a lot of drivers don't understand that bicyclists have the right to use the road or how to drive around bicyclists. And that's going to be a long-term problem for us to address with educating people, and it takes education and enforcement working together. Perhaps if we get more police officers, I'll be able to get them more involved in our programming again. They used to come and work with us all the time, and recently we haven't had anyone because they are so short-handed they haven't been able to spare officers to work with us.
Mr. Ackerson.
I just have a very quick question. I was just reading about the Zip car.
And
Folks
Zip
now
Bike.
bringing the
Yeah.
Zip bike.
Yes.
Does that fit? It's a private enterprise, but they're going to
Yes.
be located at the terminal
Yes.
in downtown here,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot on campus. So does that kind of enterprise factor into your education? And what you're calling education I'm not sure if it's narrow or if it includes things I consider outreach, like public education, like reaching all adults regardless of whether they ride a bike or drive a car or whatever, or walk. Like my wife hasn't driven a car since she was probably 18 years old. People, so when we see things like that, I think that's an opportunity for a catalyst for increasing awareness. And then when you increase awareness, then you can do education. So is that something that falls in our lap, or is that something that's actually part of the larger plan?
Well, we would love to do more community outreach. We've actually used the Safe Routes to School funding to do some publicity, but we have no grant funding whatsoever right now. We have no source of revenue to do community-wide education campaigns, and we're very desperately even need a staff person in the community whose job it is to coordinate the things that we do at this point, like Bike Month, where we spend the whole month trying to raise awareness and give people information both on how to bicycle themselves and on how to share the road. So it's really a matter of resources, and I think that if that's something that you would like to see happen, I think that what we need to do is encourage the cities to look for ways to fund those kinds of programs, because running community awareness and encouragement programs, there are lots of really great examples out there, and there's plenty of material. There's no reason for us to reinvent the wheel. I worked on a program in Grand Rapids. They got a big grant to do that. And so we can use materials that are out there, but we have to be able to pay for the airtime and the billboard time and all of the other things that are required for us to reach the public. So that's really the problem, is lack of resources. I would love to do more encouragement and education, and it's something that I'm very passionate about, and that's what I do professionally and personally. It's part of what I do all the time. So I would greatly appreciate your support and encouragement to those people who make the decisions about our priorities and how we're going to pursue funding, because there are some grant funds that we could apply for that would help with that.
Anything further for Ms. Wall? Mr. Hopkins?
This seems to raise an obvious question. Going after those grant funds to do that is not in this plan.
Well, I don't think that we...
Could it be, I guess?
It would be part of implementation.
I know. I'm just,
yeah.
I don't mean to make a big point of it. It's just, it's sort of like we're saying we ought to do something, and we're about to adopt what we're saying we ought to do for the next 5 years.
Yeah, it's something that we could, BPAC could actually take a look at and make recommendations. But we have, all we can do is make recommendations and pass it along to the city council to say that we think, we could have a greater impact on the community if we pursued funding to implement the following priorities.
Right. Well, so what
And
I think
in the implementation, there are responsible parties, and I think they did identify revenue sources for a number of those things. And if I remember correctly, that was also in there for the education and encouragement programming. But I don't think it specified specific grants to pursue. Is that correct?
I am looking at page 178. It is in the goals and objectives chapter, and the goal under the implementation theme is to secure funding and implement bicycle improvements. So everything in that section is about securing funding for implementation. And I do want to point out that just having an up-to-date plan is a useful tool for going after some of these grants too. So,
I'm simply saying I don't think we want to delay this or anything, but what we're about to do is to send a document to the city council to recommend to them how they expend their resources related to bicycles in the next 5 years. And what I've just heard is that we think there's another thing they ought to do, or maybe something they ought to do with equal priority or greater priority than some of the other things. And educating car drivers about how to share the roads strikes me as, from my own experience and my children's experience, strikes me as potentially as valuable as, to put it crassly, another stripe down the road.
We did emphasize one of the priorities in the plan was to hire staff to do the work. It's in there. We do have information on pursuing funding. Of course, with the federal grants, who knows exactly how they'll be administered with the new administration. But there are some sources of funding. I mean, the transportation plan was approved. It won't be up for reauthorization for 4 years. So that funding is in place for us to pursue.
I'm not focusing, I'm not sure whether I'm hearing what I think I'm trying to communicate. I'm not focusing on the task of getting grants. I'm focusing on the purpose of using them for car driver education. And that's all
Yeah, I think the Vision Zero program is very much focused on that from the perspective of all the roadway users. And so hopefully we'll be able to use that as a tool to help move that forward. You're absolutely right. There are many issues with drivers. We have an increasing death rate, fatality rate right now from drivers. It's been increasing for the first time in a number of years. And it's a very high number. We have over 36,000 people a year killed on our roadways, and that is a lot of people to lose, and several, well over hundreds of thousands who are injured by road crashes. So it's a very serious issue. It's a big issue.
Anything further?
So, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Hello, I am Annie Adams, and I serve on BPAC with Cynthia. And I came in kind of late to the plan, and I, of course, read the plan and put Post-it notes on all sorts of things and had all sorts of questions and ideas. That's just the nature of a plan, you know. We all have ideas, and there's all things that can be changed, and then there's stuff that we can, new things. And, I have a hobby horse that I, of course, was like, why is this not in here? But I just would really like to encourage us to pass the plan, because I really want us to get grants, and I really want this plan to start being implemented. And if we don't pass the plan, then someone actually, honestly, and that someone is in this room, has to go through and change from 2016 to 2017, 2021 to 2022. And I mean, obviously, that's not a reason to pass a plan, but it's like I really just want to encourage passing the plan. I think it's in really good shape. I think we're going to continue to tinker away at it. I think we're going to continue to see changes in cycling, because cycling is becoming a lot more popular. And I just really want to encourage passing the plan, and I just want to thank you for your time, and thank you for all your concerns, and I appreciate all your work, honestly, what you're doing, and that's really all I got to say. So thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Adams? Nope. Thank you very much. You got off easy. Any other proponents of the plan wish to address the commission? Any opponents of the plan wish to address the commission? Hearing none, I'll close the public input portion of the hearing, and we'll proceed with discussion. Any discussion?
I move we forward the plan to the city council with a recommendation for approval.
And let me emphasize that this recommendation would supersede the 2008 Bicycle Master Plan and as an element of the 2005 Comprehensive Plan. So, motion by Mr. Hopkins. Second by Mr. Turner. We can do a roll call vote whenever, unless there's further discussion. Mr. Trail?
I'm only going to say that, just a way of explanation, I'm going to vote against it again, because I didn't think the last time it was presented it was nearly ambitious enough. I don't think the changes have really done anything to alleviate that, and so again, I'm going to vote against it.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion? Roll call when you're ready.
Mr. Fell? Yes. Mr. Fitch?
Yes?
Mr. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Storr?
Yes.
Mr. Trail?
No.
Mr. Turner?
Yes.
And Mr. Ackerson?
Yes, but I have some sympathy with what Mr. Trail brings up. I don't want to delay the plan, but I really want to encourage people to think bigger and go a little further. However, I trust that process will continue, so I'm voting yes.
Okay, thank you. That motion passes. Do we have an idea when it'll go to the city council?
It will be, or we're bringing it to the committee of the whole this coming Monday,
Oh.
and then it will go to the council the
Couple weeks
following.
later.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. We don't have any other new business. Do we have any audience participation? Someone can address the council or the commission for 5 minutes if you, on any topic that's germane to planning. Yeah, oh, I had to throw that last in there, yeah.
I just want to say one of the best ways to get people who drive cars to share the road is to get them on a bicycle. And so you are all duly invited. Annie and I organize what is called a lunar cycle ride. Although our lunar cycle ride apparently is going to conflict with the next city council meeting where this will be heard, but it's a Monday night. And if it's not too cold. If it's too cold, they can come here instead. But we try to organize that once a month. We also have what's called a full moon ride once a month. I don't think they're doing those anymore, right? But it's a ride that goes to Sydney Dairy Bar, and all kinds of people go on all kinds of bikes, and families and kids. And so we're trying to organize more of those sorts of friendly, short, ours is a 5 mile or so ride around town. Getting people on a bike or having family members who are on a bike is one of the best ways for people to think about the other users of the roadway. So we'd like to do more and more of that, and we invite you to join us.
Mr. Ackerson.
I just want to, on top of that, as well as those kinds of recreational uses, I live on a street on Pennsylvania Avenue, which is a major bike corridor into campus.
Yes, it
Every
is. I use it a
day.
lot.
Since it got colder, I don't see as many, but there are many, many bikes that go down there. I find that when you have streets that bicycles use on a regular basis, and I'm talking about regular commuters and
Yep.
daily users of bikes, most cars will accommodate them. When they become used to that, this is a pathway for both. It's not just the occasional recreational user, but that they are regular mode of transportation. Now, my street, parts of it happen to be wide enough it's not an issue. It narrows a little bit as you get to campus. Traffic picks up a bit as you get to campus. But I've been both biking and driving down that street for years now, and I find people respect each other fairly well. And I know that's not the case other places. So my hypothesis is the more we get people on these streets doing both together, along with education, it can make some progress.
You're absolutely right. The data is very clear. In fact, I have several charts that show the more people you have bicycling, the fewer crashes you have. It's a fundamental of transportation planning that predictability is an important part of the roadway. And if you regularly see bicyclists, they're not the exception. They're expected part of the roadway. So that's part of the principle that you're referring to, is that people accommodate it because it's there routinely. That's absolutely true. So thank you.
I had, for our vast television audience, where do your bicycle rides
We
convene?
meet at 6 o'clock at the bike shelter in front of Common Ground Food Co-op. If you want to get your bike checked out, you can come early. We will have a bike mechanic there to check the bikes and help air up some tires if you need that. And this time, if it's not snowing or cold or whatever, the ride will include viewing the Christmas lights on Candlestick Lane.
Nice.
So the rides are also designed to help people see that you can get to someplace on a bike. So we always include a beverage. I told Annie I would help organize them if the ride included an endpoint with a beverage. So we've ended at places like Riggs Brewery, and we didn't end there. We actually stopped there along the way, or Flying Machine downtown, other places around town, so that people then can have something to drink and socialize. So that's part of the goal too, is to give people the opportunity to see you can get places. We always have destinations, like last time we went around Crystal Lake and other things like that, so that people see you can get there by bike. Sometimes what happens is people who don't bike take a route that they drive, so they do things like go try and bike down University Avenue, and then they never bicycle again because it was a frightening experience. So that's the other thing, is to help people see that there are routes you can take that are comfortable to bicycle on. Yes, go ahead.
The other thing that we really focus on is before the bike ride. We were really kind of surprised when we dropped the ride down to like a 5 mile ride versus like a 10 mile ride. We got a very different group of cyclists. So when you have a 5-mile ride, you really have to educate before the ride begins. A lot of people had never done a group ride. A lot of people had never actually ridden 5 miles on a bike. A lot of people, it was a really interesting group. And so we learned our lesson. Frankly, we have to do, beforehand, we do have to do an ABC check, we have to do the ABC check. We have to make sure we have to have a mechanic there. Because I initially was like, who cares? Let's go. But you have to have an ABC check, and then you also have to really, really kind of go through exactly what you were saying. Like, here's how you signal left. Here's how you signal right. Here's how you say you're slowing down. Here's, don't. And it's really nice because these are people who, after the ride, they were telling us they got scared on the road before. They got bullied off the road. They weren't sure what to do. They didn't know if, it was, for them, it was very exciting to do a group ride because they were like, I felt so safe. It was pretty cool. Yeah. So and it'll happen every month, once a month. And
Roads are clear.
if the roads are clear, yeah. I think it's going to be too cold on Monday, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, I mean, I of course would do it, but this isn't about me.
The event's on Facebook, so
Yeah.
great.
that's where you can.
Yeah, so we just wanted to make it in the city. We wanted to make it 5 miles, and we wanted to make it really low stress and fun. So hopefully by spring we can have all sorts of gaggles of people and lights, and it'll just be fun and goofy, and that's our goal.
Great.
Fun and goofy.
That's a good goal. All right, well, thank you. That's audience participation. Do we have a staff report? We don't have a study session, therefore, we're adjourned.